Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
And Simcha, it's great to have you on the Beyond Belief podcast. And full disclosure, we are siblings. And it's interesting because, like, you and I went to the same school. And in some ways, we experience the same parents. We experience a lot of the same society. But I know for a fact that your experience was very different. And also how you've made sense of a lot of this is different. So I welcome your perspective on all of this. Specifically, I think even amongst us, many, many siblings. So to start at the beginning, I wanted to ask you if you could give us a bit of your background. You know, like how would you describe how you were raised?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm very excited that you're doing this show, and I'm excited to hear what other people have to say as well. So, our background overall. So, I guess, yeah, it's like I can use our or mine.
Think about it as yourself. Yeah, like just speak to it for yourself. Like I'll probably have my own episode at some point.
Self-recording. Yeah, so my parents, they moved from Canada and US. My dad's from Canada, my mom's from the US. And they went to Israel on a trip for different reasons, and they ended up staying. And then they met there, they became religious, and then they met. So they moved to Israel, and they got involved with Aish Torah, which is a Jewish organization dedicated to making other Jews religious. And they moved to the old city of Jerusalem in hopes of being able to get more Jews connected that way. And then they decided to have many, many kids. Or more should I say, the default was you just have as many kids as you could pop out, in a sense. So they did that, and then they kind of found out that having kids is a little bit more challenging than you would think, but by then it was too late. And then so they sent us to very religious schools. So they raised us as ultra-Orthodox Haredi, but American Haredi. So the school we went to, and the school you went to as well, was super religious. So we would go to school like 7:30 a.m. and we would study the Torah all day, and they would fit in like an hour of normal quote unquote studies, and that was most of my life until I was like 14. And so that's what we learned. And the basic, the normal school that we did do was extremely basic. I recall like the level of it was like, for example, we learned about the science. So how did rain happen? Well, the sun evaporated the water, it went up to the clouds, and then if you prayed hard enough, it would come down as rain. And that's like, it was like graphics in the book that would show that. So that's just to illustrate how our schooling system was. And then for the regular, the Torah, the religious schooling part, even that was unordinary for religious backgrounds. We were in like a specific sect of Lithuanian Jews, and it was this method of teaching, a shita, basically reciting the Torah over and over again, and then explanations, and then just reading it over and over and over again in the same tune. And yeah, that was our life. And we spoke English at home, and we had a no Hebrew rule at home. So that meant I actually struggled a lot to actually read and understand until I was in around third grade. So I would sit there in class and not really be able to follow and really struggled, and my brain would kind of go all over the place. Eventually, I kind of managed to settle back in. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else.
Yeah, that's perfect. I don't know if you know this. I only really learned to read in third grade. It seemed to be a recurring pattern that I don't think we've always spoken about, where growing up in this cross culture, there's even a term for it. I think they called it the third generation or something like that. And it basically means you're neither here nor there. You're not your parents' culture because you're immersing more than your parents, but you're not your society's culture because you have the home you go to, and you're this in between third thing with your own unique struggles. And I think we were all kind of experienced that on top of everything else we went through. So what would you say a lot of people don't understand about growing up religious?
So you mean what's something that people don't understand?
Yeah, like you have a lot of friends. You live in Toronto now, and you've got a lot of friends who grew up in Toronto. And on the day to day, people might experience you exactly like everybody else. And when you look at their lives and you look at your lives, like you know what they went through, but what is it they don't get about what you went through?
It's a good question. That I had to learn about the world, in the broad sense, beyond God. When I was 14, 15 is when I started. So most people, you learn just like general knowledge, geography, science, math, sex, sexual health, financial things to a certain extent, just general education, arts, history, all of that I had to learn much later on, which meant that I was starting at a big disadvantage in regards to normal secular life.
Yeah.
That's one thing. I think the other thing is that I think people kind of don't really see how deeply ingrained the whole religious idea is. We kind of, a lot of people tend to simplify it, or like, oh, they're just dumb, or they don't really know. And it really is a true deep belief. Or people think, oh, they're brainwashed. And I mean, to a sense, maybe you are, but it really is a deeply ingrained belief in this entire worldview. And I think people kind of tend to oversimplify that.
I hear that. And so in that vein, like launching from that, was there any like specific laws or commandments that particularly messed with you, that were you found particularly damaging for yourself?
So I know for sure the complete segregation between females and males really kind of fucked with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I left, I had this huge gap between like what I knew and my experience with men versus with women. Because growing up, you can't talk to girls, you can't touch girls. Occasionally we would interact with females, but it was, from a very like professional, quote unquote, point. And then once I left, it was actually university. First year university was the first time I ever was in a class with females, which is crazy. And so that was really like a smack to my face. But at the time, if there's something that really fucked with me, I think anything with the promise of going to hell was really, yeah, that's not a stress that anyone should have to deal with.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a specific commandment, but it was all the big commandments where you're like, if you fuck up, you're fucked up. So I think Yom Kippur was a big one. The overall idea of you gotta, for like the weeks coming up to Yom Kippur, you pray, you're repenting, Rosh Hashanah, you're trying to gain forgiveness. And then Yom Kippur, that's the day you fast. And now, if you don't pray hard enough, you're going to hell next year. You're going to die, So that was an insane amount of stress, especially once I turned bar mitzvah. I think like when I was 12, 13, those were really stressed. But then after that, I kind of started wading away from the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah. So it like peaked at when things are, the accountability of the religion comes in, and we'll talk in a minute about your journey out. I had one question for you. It's an interesting, if you don't mind me asking. So you identify as gay, right? And so I'm curious, for a lot of people who leave religion and have to interact with women for the first time, or the opposite sex, oftentimes there's a sexual attraction component, and it makes everything that's an undertone, and you're kind of learning to date while also never having spoken to a woman before. And I'm curious in what ways you feel like it was different or similar when you had to learn how to interact with women, because that technical thing was the same, and how you experienced that when it was seemingly more platonic.
yeah, that is like a core question that I've had to grapple with because I sometimes do question how much my religious Orthodox background did affect potentially the trajectory of my sexuality.
Mm,
Because I had past experiences with men
yeah.
kind of as I was leaving religion and still haven't interacted with females. And there were some points where I had some sort of attraction that was beyond platonic to girls,
Hmm.
but there was this enormous anxiety and fear relating to it all that I think most religious people have to deal with, except I had the option to not do it, right?
Mm,
I could always back out and I always had the other background. Now, mind you, that could be one reason. The other reason could be is because the other reason that I may have not tried is because I realized, okay, this is not something I really want to do. So it's kind of the chicken or the egg a little bit in this context. But I think I definitely, growing up around men and having all that, I think it's definitely easier than the interaction with women
hmm.
in that sense.
And over the years, because you're a few years out of, you've done university for a few years now, and you've graduated, and your comfort with women is probably better than it was. Has any of those questions been laid to rest, or some of those questions still outstanding that you're still not sure about?
It's definitely more laid to rest because I've been able to explore my sexuality more, and being in Canada, I've been able to let go a lot of the shame and the depression, the self-hating sense, and date and meet people that have really made me feel good,
Yeah.
which has definitely removed a lot of that doubt.
Okay. Awesome. It's great to hear. So, continuing on to your journey out of religion, if you had to describe like the reason why you left, if there is a way to pinpoint it, what would you say? And was there a specific moment, or did it kind of happen over time?
It happened over time, and the reason it happened was after I turned bar mitzvah when I was 13, and then suddenly like they hand you that contract and you're like, okay, here's all the rules you're gonna have to follow for the rest of your life. And I tried it for a bit and I was like, yo, this is a lot. I did not enjoy it. So I started waning off. It was a process, I would say, between the age of 14 and 17. So 3 years. It really helped that our brother had left religion prior to that. So a few years before, he kind of set the tone in the house. He had to deal with all the bullshit surrounding it. So he took all the heat. And then I think came through and then you did as well. So by the time my turn came around, I saw first of all what it's like through you guys. I saw the reaction that I would have to deal with. So it was definitely a lot easier. And then I was also sent to a boarding school. So my parents kind of realized that the really religious school, I'll say that again. My parents realized that the really religious schooling system that we had gone through was maybe not working. Surprise, surprise. So they decided to send me to this really special, amazing school, quote unquote, which was horrible, but we'll get to that. And that kind of gave me the freedom. I was at this boarding school for like a week or two at a time, and I could kind of do whatever I want. And my parents had this trust in this system. So I slowly stopped, I would go to davening later, or I'd go to daven once a day. And I mean, davening is praying, for whoever doesn't know. And or I'd stop davening and I would just put on tefillin. You'd wake up, roll into the synagogue, the shul, and you would put on tefillin late or once a day, or sometimes you'd forget. And then kosher, instead of like waiting 6 hours between meat and milk, I would start waiting 3 hours because the Sfardi's do it, and it's slowly shorter and shorter. And then it was like, oh, an hour and a half. And then kosher went from like going to the highest level of kashrus to like really basic, as long as it was kosher. So basically, I got to a point where I was doing the bare minimum, which is kind of more like modern Orthodox shita. And then my breaking point was one Shabbos before Shavuos, and I was kind of really at just holding on with a thin thread. It was basically Shabbos and like basics of kosher was the only thing I was doing by then. And at the time, I was kind of seeing this boy. I think he was like my first real crush. And we would be texting all the time. And then Shabbos came around. You'd have to turn off your phone and not talk and not do anything until Motzi Shabbos. And then I kind of broke at one point, I think. Yeah, at some point, I was like, you know what? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So I just turned on my phone. And then the classic, expecting lightning to come down and strike me. But none of that. There wasn't a ton of fear. I think some people really, it's this terrifying thing. It was kind of chill. And then it kind of moved past.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. Was that person you were texting, were they also leaving religion or were they secular?
Fully secular. So, of course, you have that influence as well.
Okay.
And then that summer, I went to Canada for the first time, like as a teen. And I was working at a religious Jewish camp as a counselor, but I was staying with our non-religious cousins in Toronto, Lori and Lori, and that was my first like family non-religious experience. So, being exposed to the social scene through my cousin and being exposed to, non-kosher food, and it's just like super normal. And then I actually had bacon for the first time. And shrimp that summer. So that's when you really know you're going to hell.
Yeah, that's when you have the bacon and the shrimp. And what was our parents' take on you staying with Lori and Lori? Like, how did that even happen? I'm curious on that technicalities of. We have the unique privilege. A lot of Orthodox Jews don't have a single relative that they know of who's not religious. Like they cut off their non-religious relatives completely, or they actually don't have any. We kind of stayed in touch. It was this weird thing that our parents had one foot in the other world. So what was that like? How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, overall, in general, that is this real kind of interesting dichotomy, conundrum between like this like secular world that our parents came from, and this religious world that they were trying to bring us up into. But so our house, for example, was like full of non-religious books, like floor to ceiling bookshelves, which was and you would read these books and it's like Tom Sawyer, Harry Potter, all these like super non-religious, and it was like, oh, what amazing books, right? Stories. But then you go to school, and in the school they'd be like, that is hell. That's a horrible thing. You should not be reading. And that was this weird thing. Or we were taught, okay, you can't you have to be a good religious Jew, study the Bible. That's the reason why we're here. And then and nothing else, right? And then we'd have like these guests from all around the world every Shabbos. And I just vividly remember this like elderly couple who like traveled the world in their sailboat. And I was super inspired by it. And the reaction, of course, to them was like awe and excitement. And if that was me at the time saying I would want to travel a boat, I would be completely shunned for it. So there was definitely that contradiction. And then with our family as well, we would have our grandparents would come once, twice a year. Our cousins would come. They'd be not religious. And there was this weird attitude of like, we love them. They just don't know any better. And I think there was always this careful treading around them. And I think they were always careful of how they walked around us. So that summer, staying at Harrison's was actually really interesting. Yeah, I was there kind of staying with them. I don't know if it was really planned. And then at one point, I remember Abba called and I was talking to him, and he said something like, oh, what are you doing about kosher food? And I like paused for a moment and I said, I'm not. And that's when I like came out as not religious in a sense. And he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy. I don't remember exactly his reaction, but he wasn't happy.
Yeah.
But he dealt with it.
That tracks. Yeah, he dealt with it. So in that arc, and we've spoken about this a bit. So, the journey out, and you left pretty young, right? It's a few years now. When you look back, what was your biggest struggle in adjusting to this other secular lifestyle, essentially? Were there things you had to like unlearn, for example?
It's interesting. I find that most things I didn't struggle with to adjust. If anything, I feel like this like messed up kind of background kind of actually prepared me very well to dealing with the world. You know, if you can come from such an intense religious background and somehow leave that place and start a new life, then you can kind of do anything if you really want to. Just the one thing I've had to struggle with, and I appreciate it at the same time, so I don't try and remove it completely. But this is like this idea of modesty we were raised with. Of you need to be modest all the time, physically and also personality, anything, because the way we were raised is nothing is because of you. You didn't do anything. It was all God. So you shouldn't be, what's the word?
Arrogant or pompous or gaiva in Hebrew? Does it mean?
Gaiva. Yeah, you shouldn't be gaivadik.
Yeah.
Gaivadik. You anava.
Anava. Okay.
Anava.
Yeah.
Yeah, you try. You should have anava.
Anava would translate
Modesty.
as probably humility.
Humility. Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, So I still have that, and I do appreciate it because it's important to have that. But there's also a balance of, it's important to know your strengths and being able to be proud of that and walk around with that. And the same thing with physical. In the gay world, it's a little bit more common to be, what's the word? Again, it's a different word.
Yeah, this one, I don't want to put a word in your mouth. That stereotype is promiscuity.
Yeah, I guess maybe a little bit promiscuous. Yes, and that's not necessarily the most bad thing, I think, to an extent.
Yeah.
It could be, there's a level of freedom that comes with that, and I still have a level of shame sometimes. Not shame, but there's a part of me is like, I shouldn't be doing this, why am I less dressed than I should be?
Right.
And I struggle with that sometimes.
I hear. Yeah. So is there anything, and I particularly like asking you this question because you're always able to balance the other side. Like, I think I'm much more of an extremist in a lot of views, and you're always like, yeah, but that's actually, like you just said now. So you may have already answered this, but if you have anything else to add, is there anything you miss from that old life?
Yes. Part of me misses the level of comfort and security that came from like the belief that everything comes from above, that God decides everything for you, and God is deciding everything that's the right for you.
Yeah.
You do ishtadlus, you try your best, and everything else works out. The idea of gamzu tova, or which means translated as this too is for good, or the idea of kol zman ve'et kol chefes tachat hashamayim. Everything has a time and a place under the sky. So I definitely miss a little bit of that. There's a lot more stress, a lot more weight put on myself, and this control, this control that I believe I have for my life. Therefore, everything's up to me. There is no one else deciding anything, and that could be a little hard.
Yeah.
The second thing I do miss is Shabbos. The idea of Shabbos was not always the most positive, but I do miss, like, let's just say I'm really grateful I had that, because especially in today's world where we're completely always connected to the internet, to our phones and everything. Growing up, Friday late afternoon would come in and we would shut everything off. Everything would pause. Friday would be extremely hectic. Everyone freaking out, trying to get ready before Shabbos. I remember everyone screaming and the bathroom knocking, right? We grew up family of 9 with like 2 bathrooms in the whole house. So it was insane. But then Shabbos would come, disconnect, we'd come home from shul. Emo would make this huge, amazing meal. And it was a time we would get the special games. We'd get our Playmobil, our Lego. We'd play cards. I would read so many books. I would sit in the toilet for hours and reading. And I remember it of a time as really connection with other people. Mostly like friends and other siblings.
So you found it as a time to connect with friends and siblings?
I didn't find it as a time for that, but it became a time for that because you had nothing else to do.
Okay, so it kind of
You're
forced
gonna
it to
read
happen.
books, or
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of forced. Yeah,
And during the week,
and it was
that wouldn't
nice. My
happen
parents
because you're so busy with school?
during the week, yeah. First of all, there's school. We literally by fifth grade, I was studying till 6 p.m. Then have that, and then you had other things. I think it's the length of time. There's this like full 24 hours where once you're forced to not do certain things, you start getting used to it. And then there's a level of peace that comes on. Just like with meditation, the first few minutes, it's very like full of turmoil, but if you give it enough time, you'll slowly adjust into it. And Shabbos kind of had that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it wasn't necessarily always the most positive, especially once I started turning 13 again. But when I was 10, 11, really loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, this is me interjecting my memories, but I guess they contrast or overlap. The more obligations were inserted into Shabbos, the more like I had to go to synagogue myself, or the more I needed to be careful about
Mm-hmm.
things. At some point, it became like just another day where you're supposed to learn, but you're supposed to learn on your own. And I would be full of guilt all the time that I wasn't studying on that one day a week that I was supposed to have a time off. I was no longer allowed to have that time off, and I was supposed to go, and I had no self-discipline and I didn't want to. So I would just think about how much I wasn't studying for the entire time. There's a lot of guilt that I associate with that day, but I completely hear when we were younger, there was a lot of like fun. It was packaged into fun and the
Yeah,
responsibility takes
yeah.
over, which is fascinating.
I think yeah, I agree with that. I think, again, once it was 12, 13, when you started had to go to shul for literally 2 hours in the morning, and then you couldn't eat before Kiddush, and then you'd be starving for
Yeah.
hours, and then you would have to do your thing and come back, and then there was like you had to do there's a Samaj zone with a minion or whatever it's called, and yes, and then you have to leave Shul Shudis and go to Mariv. Yeah, then it became a lot less fun. But like as a kid, we'd wake up, it would be like the day off, we'd eat our yummy Shabbos cereal, and then we'd go play games until Abba would come home, and then we'd eat yummy food. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the general theme is Judaism for me is beautiful until too many rules come into play.
I like that. I think that sets it well. So this is a question that's not even on here, but it occurred to me. You in particular went through a lot of shit all through your upbringing, and I'm curious if you had to divide it broadly between the shit you went through from like 0 to like 12, and from 13 to adulthood, like childhood versus teenage years. Which would you describe as was more difficult for you?
I think 0 to 12 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a moment, but yeah, because 13, 14 were difficult, maybe till 15, and then it went uphill.
Okay, so it was less
Oh,
years.
for sure. Started, yeah, so it's 3 years, and even then it was like a level of, even by the time I left the house and I went to Zarim, it wasn't great. There were a lot of downsides, but it was a huge positive there. Like growing up, I had Zilbermans, so over there I had to deal with, the teachers who were hitting the students,
Yeah.
including me, or especially me. I was dealing with bullying in third grade, for the entire class, and then I was dealing with an often overwhelmed parents, or should I say, overwhelmed mother. She wasn't reacting the most positively all the time, and yeah, and then of course I was dealing with struggle with the language for many years. I was dealing with like wetting the bed as well. So yeah, I think 0 to 12 definitely wins.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The results are in. So, with all that history and stuff like that, how has your journey of healing been? Like it's been a good few years now. You're in a different country. What have you found to be most healing for you?
Yeah, so I think overall, I think this is where we're a little different, the way we see it.
Yeah.
I think life is always a constant state of healing from our past, but I don't see it as necessarily the most traumatizing.
Okay.
In a sense, I actually view it as a lot of positive that came out of this fucked upness. But there is a lot of trauma, and there's a lot I've had to deal with. And by far, the therapy, first of all, lots of therapy. I started therapy when I was 14, social worker in school, and that helped me like overcome the challenges that I had to go through.
Hmm.
Like until I was 14, I was super afraid to speak up or
Okay.
to disagree with anyone. Really like חסר ביטחון עצמי,
Yeah.
כמו שאומרים.
Lack of self-esteem.
And self-esteem. And first therapist really helped me kind of overcome that, which was a huge game changer for sure. Like once you have confidence to just be able to carry yourself to some extent, you can go places.
Hmm.
And my religious upbringing did not give that to me. So therapy, many years of therapy, and I would say psychedelics, acid.
Acid specifically.
Yeah, it's been most of my experience. Acid. First time I took it was I was probably like 18, and yeah, the first few times were like kind of purely for fun. But at some point, I started. Me and Aviva we used to go to a cottage and we'd take it, and then Aviva would always have these like enlightening moments, and which things would come up, and then I asked her, I'm like, how do you have this? I really want to have these like moments, and how do I connect to that? Because I didn't feel it. And then she told me, she's like, oh, if you have this urge, when you're sitting there and you have this urge of you want to eat or you want to do something, that's when you stop yourself and you actually sit there and you feel the feeling. Because when that comes up, it's something is coming up and your instinct is to run away from it. And that's the moment where you need to resist that urge. And I tried it, and then it worked. And I remember that first time bawling my eyes out over something from my past, and it was the most incredible experiences of my life. And then since then, I've been able to, almost every time, I'm able to connect to certain things and let things out. And especially when it's on my own, when I have my own space, I feel I don't have that's the word.
Like a self-assessment or like a self-conscious or yeah.
Self-consciousness. Yeah. So like when I'm middle of nowhere, when I don't feel like I'm going to be bothering anyone, I'm able to bring stuff out.
Yeah.
And I remember one particular time when I was living in my bus in Quebec, and I was in the middle of nowhere, and I did acid, and then I don't know how it got to that, but it was specifically in particular focused on everything that I had dealt with as a kid. And yeah, there's nothing that can describe the feeling of like crying all of that out
Yeah.
and letting it out. It's the most amazing feeling. And it's interesting is that, like I tell people about these things sometimes, and I'm like, they're like, "Oh, why did you cry? No, why are you crying?" I'm like, no, it's the best thing ever.
Right.
Like crying is the most amazing thing we can do as humans, and people kind of look at it negatively.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, acid, and then again, also actually being around the right people. So I would say you, the rest of my siblings, Aviva, all these people who went through a similar journey and were able to connect and talk about it and talk through it. And my other friends, like when I started reliving religion, I connected with these people who also had a similar background, many of whom are from the gay community. So it was just really good to be around people who love you for who you are and appreciate you without all that negativity surrounding it.
Hmm. So just jumping off that last point, you said people who love you to who you are without the negativity. Contrast that with what you were before. Like what is the difference or the opposite of that?
The opposite of that was, here's the rules to life. The more you follow it, the more value you have in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The more we love you. And if you don't follow it, we still love you, but less so.
Yeah.
So, if I didn't keep kosher, you could definitely feel there was a lot less love from my parents
Mm-hmm.
because I'm sinning. Abba would have this thing where it's like, well, you don't keep kosher, so I mean, I'm doing this really nice thing for the kids who keep kosher. You can do whatever you want to do. I'm not forcing you, but I'm just saying, like, you don't deserve that, There's this level of guilt.
So it would
I'm good
literally
enough. And
manifest
then
in his behaviors. He'd be like, "We're all going on a something ski trip. I'm making this up, but like we're doing something. You're not invited because you're not religious."
no, it wasn't that. It was he would. It's basically what it meant, but a lot of times it would mean like, no, I'm just doing something special who are for the people who are religious. It's not that you're not getting it because you're not religious.
Right. So you wouldn't get to do this special thing.
Because I wasn't religious, but the way he'd be like shaping it is it's an extra bonus for the people who are religious, not a punishment for you.
I get it. Yeah.
Makes sense.
You're not getting
It's
the
the same
you're
thing.
not getting the carrot. It's not the stick. It's a carrot, and you're not getting the carrot. Great. What would do you have an example of that? Like that sounds fucked even by the standards that which are very very low.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure actually there was some sort of trip at one point
Okay.
that I wasn't invited to.
Really?
I don't know if it was a ski trip or something, but it was. It was a few years ago.
Okay.
What else? I'm trying to think of example exactly, but there was definitely things like that.
Yeah. And
And
so
then,
there's a
yeah.
real conditionality. So you're surrounding yourself with people who accept you for who you are, and that really creates that
Yeah.
relief and permission.
Overall, too. I mean, the whole idea of a gay person was completely looked down upon in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
Being attracted to men, anything has to do promiscuity,
Yeah.
and anything that has to do with femininity as a male.
Right.
All those things are completely looked down upon.
Yeah.
And then you leave and suddenly you're around people who don't give a fuck, and not only don't give a fuck, they actually love that about you. That's really a huge difference. And so a lot of the traits that I had that I kind of wasn't proud of, I started becoming more proud of and tapping into it more.
Yeah.
Now I've never been gayer.
Amazing.
And it's funny because most people who might know me, they're like, wait, no, you're not that gay. But I mean, compared to what I was,
Right.
gay butterfly.
Amazing. So going back a second, you had mentioned that overall you don't see it. Yeah, there is stuff to heal, but actually really see how it informs you. Can you speak more to, I guess, this feeling that like, yeah, this is what made me today, who I am today?
Yeah, that's the question that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I probably have different views, but I welcome yours, and I actually think it's a very useful, very positive way. So I'd love for you to share it with people. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that everything we ever experience shapes us to be who we are today. And if you're happy with where you are today, which I am, then really everything that happened to you was positive in that sense. So that's just in the broader terms. And in the more minute, like kind of looking into it, this place of adversity that I came from created this worldview and this drive somehow to really kind of do things for myself and push through and see things in a unique way. So, for example, I was kicked home from school one time, and what was supposed to be just like bringing my parents for like one day ended up being 2 weeks of me hanging out around the old city of Jerusalem, doing my own thing for 2 weeks. Now, luckily, something pushed me to do something positive in that time. I could have done much more worse things, but I spent that time reading books, learning about the world, exploring and traveling, and that gave me a huge, like, enormous positive boost to myself because I just have that. And also, this coming from this background of religiousness to like to come from a place where you really believed in one thing and really understanding that, and then to leave and to go into another world, that really helps. Just to be able to connect other people, to understand other people.
How does that part help?
Well, it helps because there's a level of empathy, there's a level of connection that you can have. But the reason I have it is because I can understand how all these views kind of align with their own. So,
are you saying that when you meet somebody who maybe has a dogmatic belief or hardline belief that's different than your own, you can have empathy for them because you understand how they got there?
Yes. And I also connect to it. It's not like I have empathy, like, oh, they're wrong, but okay, I can understand it. It's more like, well, I don't know. You know what? Like, so be you. And then I'll be able to engage in it, even in a sense.
So there's an
So a good
open-mindedness,
example.
to like, you spent so much years of your life passionately believing something, and that was taken away. So who knows what's true and what's not, but actually, like, in the positive, like, I'm open to all things.
Yes, more in that sense. Yeah, like for example, the whole, political situation,
Yeah.
Israel, Palestinians. Like I have this kind of ability to agree to disagree, but more so like really just not react so much to differences in opinion. More so when it's a bigger thing. Coming from such a like strict background where this like dogmatic point of view, and leaving that, it's really been a good experience in that sense. So I'm able to see the other person. I'm able to see the other point of view, and it's given me like I had to work hard. I had to make my own choices and leave and learn everything from scratch. And that's not something that is necessarily the most normal thing in the world. So I see that as a positive
Mm-hmm.
element.
I hear that.
And then there's also, I think the other thing is, I really enjoy the fact that my exposure to the world, and I would say normal pleasurable things, was really limited. So that means computer, television, money. We lived very frugally. Sex, this idea of like working hard for money. All of that being limited, now I have it, but I have a deep appreciation of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't seek it out too much. Like I'm content with the little things because I was raised on that idea.
Okay. So you were raised on that idea, not you were raised without it, and so even little bounce of it satisfy you. It's not that; it's you actually raised on the idea to appreciate the little things.
I think it's both in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think raised without it, so I appreciate it, but it's also I was raised with that idea and I didn't completely throw that idea away.
Right.
So I found this balance. Because some people, they leave and that's all they want. They want this like pleasure and they're trying to go as far away from it as possible, but somehow I'm not.
I hear that. Would you change anything in your journey out of religion, that whole arc? If you could go back and do one thing different, would you, or are you happy with the whole overall trajectory?
That's the question. Would you change anything in your life? No, because that would make me completely different
Right.
as a person. That's my first answer. Now, if I like pause and think if there's something specific that I wasn't as happy with, I think kind of one thing. I went to Hadera, the yeshiva up north, and during that year, I went to Zorim, which was the other high school that was even better, and I was given the option to come there. I was given the option to come in the middle of the year and then stay a year, but to switch earlier. And I was kind of like having a good enough time in the other school, and I didn't want to stay another year, so I decided to come at the end of the year, start fresh. In retrospect, I kind of maybe wish I had gone earlier because that would have been way more productive. In reality, I probably wouldn't have stayed another year because I caught up so fast with everything. But I think that would have changed a lot of things because even the fact that the year above me was so much more American than the year that I came into. So I think I would have had a better time socially, and who knows.
Mm-hmm. This is in Zoharim, that second yeshiva you went to. Yeah.
Yeah, but still, everything kind of happened the way it needed to happen. And
yeah.
See, you still have that shgacha pratis.
Exactly. It's all still just you're living a religious life here. Amazing. I love that. So to finish off, I thought I'd offer you, if you feel like it, do you have any questions for me?
Just what kind? Saying anything?
I mean, I'm assuming somewhere in the topic of what we've been talking about today. You could ask me what my favorite color is, but I don't know if that's the most.
Well, I had a question regarding, and I don't know if this relates, it will fit into the podcast or not, but I think we maybe once talked about it, but when I was 10, 11, when I was having all that shit at school and with my classmates.
Yeah.
Like, what was your take? Why do you think I was picked on?
That's a great question. I'll start by saying that I was somewhat oblivious to this. There was something very fascinating that happened in our family, where everybody lived in their own little bubble. And I think it was because we were so preoccupied for trying to get ourselves attention. Everybody else was kind of the enemy. And we also never were offered opportunities to share as a family. Nobody was listening, and there was no point of enough silence. Everyone was just clamoring for the basic stuff. So I've also was a few years older, so I was at that point not aware of a lot what was going on. Abanima supposedly knew parts of it, but only a fraction of those things trickled down to me. But if you want to know why I think you were picked on in particular, I think this is like a sociological, like psychological thing. It's like, especially in societies where it's all about like might makes right, and you feel good by somebody being below you, society will pick, our classroom will pick, or Orthodox Jews will pick somebody who's below them at that point. And I think we were automatically targets to some degree or another just by being the English speakers, the scapegoats. You had parts of you, from what I recall, that could have contributed to that further. The two things, you had a simultaneous, like almost scared look that I see in you from like a fairly young age when I look at like the family photos. It's like you looked, and I think it makes perfect sense with the family you were born into, right? So that's that one aspect of it. And then you also were like very unhappy and like almost angry, I would say, a lot of the times. And for those who are like wanting to provoke and get a response, you would be reactive, right? And that's, I think, probably what you worked on partially with your social worker. So if you're trying to like goad someone and get them to fight, and then you win, you want to pick a fight, you were actually a really, really good subject for that. Like if you'd been coached over the years to not feed into that, it probably would have helped a lot, but you were just doing what you knew. That reactivity, I think, contributed probably further. We had kids we'd bullied. I don't know exactly what it was about you in particular, but look, I look back on how I was a lot of the times, and I cringe. You know, the coping mechanisms we built onto ourselves, they got us through, but man, they were not. I don't consider myself a very likable child in many ways. You know, we all had like deeply sensitive things, and you know me, I was an absolute shithead to you guys. And so there was a lot of that we were all doing to survive. So that's, I don't know if that gives you any context.
Yeah, no, that I think that those two, the scared look and the the three things.
Yeah, I mean,
Being
I'll share
American.
this. I'll share this. And again, this does not paint me in a very good light. I used to sarcastically call you Simcha, the happy man, because you were never happy. And Simcha means like joy in Hebrew. And I remember being pretty young and being struck by the absurd oppositeness of it. So a lot of that type of stuff, like us really not living up to our names, was just important. But you in particular were like, I remember the unhappiness. It was palpable. And it's I think that anytime that something like that is so stark, it is not saying anything about you. It says something about the complete lack of help that you were given. The more obvious it is, the more is a condemnation of those around you who still did nothing. And I, remembering your story and stuff like that, your cries for help were louder than a lot of other people, and they were met with the complete zero.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you mean the cries of help?
The behavioral stuff, right? The nonverbal, this kid, like when you're a psychologist or a school social worker, the obvious things that you use to spot, this is a case that I need to intervene on. You checked every box. There was not being able to read and being bullied and wetting your bed, which you mentioned earlier. All of those things by themselves are already things that you need to intervene on. And you were delivering it as a stack. Like you were not hiding it at all. There's sometimes accusations of, why didn't you tell us? You told us. Like you told everybody that you could. Like it was the most obvious thing possible. And it was still completely not dealt with.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Trying to think what else for you. What's your craziest memory of like that would use to describe our house as a religious household?
A religious household? Because my craziest memories aren't really religious related. They're
Okay, either way.
I've got more memories, I think, but just slightly more disgusting, but an amusing one is on Friday afternoons, you were mentioning, we would all bathe. We would all take a bath in the same dirty water. Do you remember that? There'd be one bath, and we would all just get in, and the first one would be clear water. And I think I actually wanted to go in last because I didn't want to be bothered by somebody coming in after me. So you literally couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was all like shampoo and stuff like that. Nobody taught us to use soap. I think we only did shampoo.
Oh my God, no one did soap. I had to learn how to use soap when I was like 15.
Exactly. I had to learn to do soap when I got married, right?
We washed our hair.
Yeah.
For some reason, the hair was a thing.
Yeah.
Even though, like, who the fuck cares about hair? But the body? No.
Yeah.
I swear, I probably washed my soap for 15 years. I didn't.
Exactly. And I for some reason had this thing like crotch and armpits, so I knew how to do that, but it didn't even occur to me that you would need to use soap on any other part of your body.
But you knew that. I didn't know that.
I think I knew that because like mikvah and like religious things, and you would go and you couldn't have knots. Religion played in weirdly into how I approached a lot of practices, which was probably different than yours because I was like religious for longer. So we would all bathe in the same dirty water. None of us used soap, and then we would all like steal each other's towels. And again, this isn't really religion. This is just the family we grew up in. But it intersects really nicely because it was Israel because of religion, and it was Friday afternoon because of religion, and it was 9 kids because of religion. So I think it all kind of feeds into each other, and any mental unwellness was exacerbated by what we were surrounded by.
Yeah. I remember like the knocking on the door, like, God, get out, you've been in there for 30 minutes, blah, blah, blah.
There was a real undertone of chaos that was right above the surface.
It wasn't really undertone. It was very much chaos.
Yeah.
Even running to the food like every Shabbos is absolute chaos. Like if I were to film a movie, that would be a great opening scene.
Yeah.
Like the house 20 minutes before candlelighting.
Yeah.
I would say at candlelighting.
So with all that said, as we come towards the end, I'm curious what you would share with other people. You have a pretty unique worldview, and you've been through a lot. Are there any books, resources, or any other advice that you would recommend to somebody else who's, leaving religion, I would say, more recently, right? And is looking to those who have left before?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say on that. I would say, first of all, to try and surround yourself with people that you want to be like. And I know that it's not necessarily so easy to a lot of people, especially if they're in a very close community. I was lucky enough, I went to this LGBTQ community youth center, and that's where I met my friends. So that was the first start.
This is in your teens in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the place in town where there's like behind a locked door? It's like all security. Yeah, okay. I didn't know you were going there that young. Okay, cool.
Yeah, like 17, 16. That's where I met Luis, Micha. They moved like 3 times though.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was really helpful, I would say, for sure. Surround yourself with correct people. And there's so many resources for that too. There's community centers all around for that. Other thing is learn as much as you can about, the broad world beyond religion. That was really helpful. So I would say read books.
Are there specific books?
Yeah, I'll mention them. But I think the fact that I was exposed to books early on really helped. Really, really helped. So some books, number one book I would say, and I think you would agree with me, is Sapiens. Really, really important book just to help you like understand the context of the world and how we got here. I think it's very helpful. I really enjoyed The Tipping Point as well. Really helped in understanding, social movements, social changes, which really it helps you to realize, your own social movement that you can't come from Judaism. And you could really understand how it's not all just God and belief. It's actually sociology and psychology all influencing together. What other advice do I have? Yeah, I mean, it really helps to know English. And I think anyone listening to this knows English enough.
Hopefully, right?
But wow, I'm so lucky. We're so lucky that we were raised with English because so many religious people, their parents might be English speakers and then they come and they kind of drop it all. And for some reason, our parents actually didn't do that. So that was really helpful. I think not to be too hard on yourself, You could push yourself to do better and to explore and grow, but just to pause sometimes and remember that like even any step out and any step in this direction of leaving religion and growth is a huge step.
Amazing.
Like sometimes I have to remind myself that. I'll sit there, I'm like having a hard day, and I'm like, oh, I'm a failure or not managing. And then I'm like, yo, dude, you could still be in yeshiva right now. Like, you're doing great. You're doing great. And then I'll be like, yeah, man. And then I'll keep going, you know?
Awesome. Well, Sim, thank you for joining me. It's cool to be able to have more of a personal discussion like that because of what we share and what we know. And so thank you for being so upfront about your journey.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it. And be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.